Hello there and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're gonna take a look at 7 mistakes you might be making when you draw eyes. Anime eyes especially, but some of these also apply to other art styles. And of course I'll give you tips you can follow to avoid these mistakes and not ruin your beautiful waifus' faces. As an artist who's been dedicated to her craft for about 20 years, don't try to guess a lady's age, please. I've made all these mistakes at some point, and you're probably making them too. But rest assured, they're fairly easy to fix once you understand what's not working. So let's dive right into the #1 mistake you might be making when drawing anime eyes.
Disclaimer: even though Rina is labeling these as mistakes, take her advice with a grain of salt, please. The tips you'll find in the following minutes are not meant to offend anyone, and they're also not strict rules. If you want to take them, that's cool, and if you don't want to, that's great too. It's your art after all.
Okay, so the first thing I've noticed that 99% of us do when we start drawing anime is we make the eyes way too big. I know, there are many different art styles out there, and some artists like Arina Tanemura or Pink Hanamori can draw huge yet beautiful eyes. But even with that, there's kind of a limit as to how big you can go, you know? If the skull of your character is just eyes and nothing else, chances are you're getting a bit carried away. Your characters won't be more expressive just because their eyes are bigger. The second mistake I usually see is not leaving the right amount of space between the eyes. As a general rule, you should keep them at about the distance of another eye. No need to take out a ruler and measure this closely, don't worry. A rough guess is more than enough. Or you can just copy-paste one of the eyes and try to put it in between them for a quick check. If the eyes are too close or way too far apart from each other, it's gonna start looking weird, unless you find a way to balance these by adjusting your anatomy with other exaggerated proportions, of course. The third and most common mistake I see other artists making is not joining my Patreon. Because if they joined, they would have watched my tutorials about eyes and they would have learned to perfectly draw and color them by now. So you know what you have to do to fix that. Check out my Patreon through the link you'll find in the description or the top right corner of the screen to learn all my secrets, as well as help me be able to bring you more videos like today's one. Okay, done with the self-promotion. Here's the actual third most common mistake you might be making: giving your eyes an excessive amount of eyelashes or their thickness not matching the eyelid. Humans have a lot of eyelashes, about 1 or 2 hundredths just on the top eyelid. Impressive, huh? But obviously we don't want to draw every single one of these on our art. I'd say between 1 and 5 is more than enough for most anime styles. That doesn't mean you can't add more, but be careful about this, because if you draw very thin eyelids but then suddenly add a bunch of little hairs on them, it might be counterproductive. You don't need that many lashes to represent a human eye. If you love adding that high amount of detail though, you should try to find a way to balance it somehow. Back in the day, there was this artist on DeviantArt called Kimi Manga who drew all her characters with these giant eyelashes. Her art is a great example of what I'm trying to express here. Usually would call this a mistake, but she found a way to make it work and turn it into a unique trait of her art. So add many eyelashes if you want, but keep in mind that such a level of exaggeration can make it more difficult later on to draw certain expressions, mostly because the eyelashes will be what catches the viewer's attention, and so it might be hard for them to focus on other parts of the drawing. Number 4. Another mistake we tend to make when we just land in the world of anime is making the eye highlights way too big. If the iris is mostly filled with highlights, there's a high risk that the eyes will look watery, and this can make the gaze of the character hard to read because these big elements, the highlights, won't leave you enough room to play with the others, like the pupil, shadow, extra shiny dots, etc. Number 5. On the topic of highlights, I've also noticed that sometimes we place them symmetrically, like those guys from the Promare or Promare, I don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce that, but you know that movie. And I'm so sorry, but the art style was criminal in that sense. I don't understand the reasoning behind this artistic choice. They all look cross-eyed most of the time. Anyway, highlights on real human eyes are usually placed the same way on both of them. It's just the way it works. Remember that the highlights are usually visible around the cornea, which is that transparent dome that protects the iris. It's not an opaque element. If you put one of the highlights on the left side, the other one should be on the left too, even if it's the opposite eye. This helps us direct the gaze of the character a lot better than placing them symmetrically. Mistake number 6 is about the size of the iris. If the iris is too big and it covers most of the sclera, aka the white part of the eyeball, it may limit the facial expressions a lot. Usually, when we want to make a character appear scared or shocked, we tend to play with the size of the iris and shrink it a little as a way to reinforce the opening of the eyelids. So if the irises are too big by default, you have less room to play switching things around to make new expressions. And honestly, it makes the characters look almost like animals or aliens. Though this might be interesting for fantasy creatures, I gotta give you that. Number 7. Talking about sizes, the size of the pupil is quite important as well. I'm personally not a fan of having super big pupils by default on a character. The reason is the same as the previous point. A way too big of a pupil doesn't allow you to play as much with the space around the iris. It limits the character's expression, and it might make your art lean more towards a cartoon or Disney style. And in this case, that's not what we want, because I'm teaching you how to draw anime eyes. Number 8. Yeah, I'm feeling generous today, so I'm going to add one extra tip for you. I often see artists making one of the eyes way smaller than the other. And don't feel bad if you fall into this group, I've been there too. In my case, this started to happen when I first learned about perspective. It's super cool being able to reproduce depth by just changing the size of two identical elements. So whenever I drew 3/4 faces, I was like, wait, this eye should be smaller because it's further away than the other one. And yeah, that's right. That's what perspective says. But here's the thing, unless you're going for a very extreme perspective or distorted point of view, like a fish lens or something like that, the size of the other eye doesn't change that much. The human eye isn't formed to create that sort of distortion, so we rarely perceive any size difference when we're speaking face-to-face to a person. So it's okay to make the other eye slightly smaller, but just slightly. Don't go crazy like I used to do. Oh gosh. And that would be it. Take the advice from this video with a grain of salt, please. I know I called most of these mistakes, but it's true that with the right combination of features, some of them can work and become part of one's art style. For example, Pokemon really said, "Fine, we're gonna give our characters noodle-like irises and put them inside these awfully thin bracket-like eyelids." And nobody questioned them. But there's a difference between making all these mistakes because you don't know any other way or because it's your stylistic choice among all the available options. I hope you found this video useful and that it can help you shape your art style a little better. Don't forget to like, subscribe if you're new here, and click on the bell icon to not miss any future videos. Also, check out my Patreon for more tutorials and art resources to improve your skills. Thank you so much for watching. Keep on drawing, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!